Hello world, and welcome to more Deep Thoughts with Dave. The topic today is body image, pain, pleasure, the brain, all wrapped into one glorious package. And so a lot of this has to do with, I'll start off with a bang here, it has to do with phantom limbs. Phantom limbs is experienced by people for many years whenever they lose a limb through amputation or accident, whatever that might be. And so to understand exactly what a phantom limb is incredibly important to the understanding of this whole big thing that I'm going to talk about. So you have phantom limbs. Let's get a little history from them at first. We have a phantom limb. We have a guy named Lord Nelson. He loses his right arm in a war in 1977, gets blown off, and he loses it. And what then happens is it's his belief, because he gets a phantom limb, that it's immutable evidence that at that point you know that there's a soul, because if you can feel a limb there when there is no limb, well, that's the projection of your soul, what is actually you, and you are not your arm. And he's hitting somewhere close to the mark, but they found that they have, I would say, a better explanation then. So this then proceeds that we have these people doing tests on monkeys. There's a guy named Taub. And what he was thinking was that if he tested on monkeys this idea that he thought, because he considered, or the understanding of the way that our nervous system worked in its connection to the brain was that if you have, you got your arm right here, and if you have some sort of stimulus or input sensation here, that it's that touching of here that creates a response in your brain that then lets you know that that arm is there, in fact, that there's a mental map associated with this arm because you're able to touch it. And what he thought was that if you remove the nerves from the arm, that you would remove the need for that in your brain. You would remove any sort of a sensation associated with it. And so, the mental map that had developed in your brain associated with this arm would simply disappear. But what he found in his tests, because he monitored the brain activity of what it was when you stroked an arm, he saw what sort of brain activity occurred. He removed the nerves from the monkey's arm, and lo and behold, when they went back, the brain map was still there, but what was bizarre, what they discovered, was that the brain map had migrated to a region nearby in the brain, and a region in the brain close to the sensation of your arm is associated with your face. And so they found that if they stimulated the face of the monkey, that they would get the same sort of brain activity occurring as though you had touched an arm. And so these brain maps didn't disappear. They in fact stayed in place and just moved around. They migrated. And this is kind of evidence of how when we are born and when we grow, that our body and our image and how we associate what it is that makes up who we are is held in here and not out here. If you remove this arm, more important is the fact that your brain believes that it had an arm and it holds on to it, and it doesn't just disappear when you remove it. And so this is what accounts for phantom limbs. It's that if somebody loses a limb in a war, in an accident, and whatever happens, is that that part of their body will not disappear. It will migrate to some other area of their brain. And then you will have problems associated with it. For example, 95% of amputees, when this amputation happens, when this shock occurs to their body, that they will have in their phantom limb, they will have pain with a limb that is not there. But now we're getting into the deeper idea of like what is actually there. And what is actually there seems to be what the brain believes is there, even if it's gone. And so what the brain has done is it has migrated, say a person lost their arm in a motorcycle accident. It has migrated this pattern or this brain map for using their arm to some other part of their brain so it can still hold on to the idea of an arm being there, thus the phantom limb. But then the painful associations that it had as the limb was lost also get stuck in a loop. And so people, if they lost their arm, like I say, a motorcycle accident, are feeling the pain of that in the map that is still remaining in their head. Fascinating, no? So this moves along. There is a doctor. His name is Dr. Ramachandran. Not saying this that well. And this doctor, he's an East Indian, really fascinating guy, and he's interesting, and his strength lies in not overcomplicating things. I think a lot of people have difficulty, approaching the subject of neuroplasticity and, how much the brain changes and evolves, because it's kind of it's a spiritual thing a little bit, because it's accepting just how much this isn't something that's set in place. And so the way that he's worked in his studies was to believe that you could solve or tap into these things quite easily without really, really advanced technology. And his tests, he started to see people, because he read into Taub, he read into the guy who worked with the monkeys, and he thought, if these mental maps move, then that must be what he's the one who realized what the phantom limbs were. He goes, oh, well, you know what, these people are experiencing phantom limbs. It must be like this study showed that they've moved to this other region of the brain, where then if you stimulate the face, you stimulate the brain map as well that was associated with the arm. And so he had a guy come in to his work who had lost his arm in a motorcycle accident, and a bizarre thing associated with this guy's accident was that he had an itch, a real bad itch, before he lost his arm in the accident. And when he lost it, not only did he have the phantom limb like everybody else did, but he had this terrible itch. Not so bad as obviously maybe the pain loop that could have been stuck with him, but imagine you have an itch literally that you cannot scratch. This is the ultimate you cannot scratch itch. But reasoning, as he did, Dr. Ramachandran reasoned that if these monkeys, you could then light up the sensation in their brain that showed the activity associated with their now nerveless arm, could you not then touch a limb that was not there, but your brain perceived to still be? And so he had this guy into his office, and he performed the famous Q-tip test, where all he did with this guy was get a Q-tip out and start to move it around the guy's face, because it was understood at that point then this is where the map would go. It would go to facial input from your arm if it were lost. And lo and behold, the guy said he could actually feel on the phantom limb the Q-tip. And he touched here and there and here and there, and he started to feel different places. And then to continue with this, he put a little water on the guy's face, and the guy said, I feel like I have hot water running down my phantom limb. And as far as the brain is concerned, this is the point I'm going to keep driving home, is that it is touching the limb. Because when all our brain believes is what matters, it is touching the limb. The limb that was there is subjective. It could be or could not, but that our brain believes it makes it so. And so this meant that eventually the doctor said, well, where's the itch? And the guy said, well, it's a little further. And the guy moves up and moves up. He found the itch, and he scratched the itch that was not there and gave him relief, which triggered the mental map in his brain to believe that it had been scratched and that he no longer felt the sensation anymore. Fascinating. That's just incredible. This then extends to kind of a fun story. So, not all phantom limbs have this painful association with them. And so when I've talked already about the fact that the mental map will migrate, it will move, they've understood now, that it will move to some other adjacent region that is closely associated with whatever else is in that area of your body. So when you lose your arm, it's very close in your brain to where your facial input is, and so it moves to that area, and that mental map merges with one another. When you lose your leg, and some people have lost their legs, it's incredibly close to your genitalia. And so what they found was that a lot of people came to the same doctor and said they were really embarrassed. They were having these bizarre occurrences where when they had orgasms during sex, they felt as though the missing foot or leg was having an orgasm. And one guy was really embarrassed because he said that his leg is so big, it felt better in the phantom leg. So the associated brain map, the place that it's migrated to in your head, because it was so close to the genitals, your missing foot then became associated with your orgasms. Magic of the mind happening here. We can then move on. That's just a fun little story. So, other things to deal with. You also have the idea of frozen limbs. We've talked about a number of different sensations that can get locked in at this point. You can have pleasure that then gets backwards associated with the missing limb. You can get an itch that was there in the limb before it was gone, but because it was never resolved or never perceived to be resolved, your brain holds on to it. Something else can happen, and this is reported in a number of different situations, number of different case studies, where before a limb is amputated and they haven't decided yet what they're going to do with it, they'll hold a limb in a sling, so it can't move. Immobile. We're going immobile. And what will happen then is, you can imagine, the brain will develop a pattern, an understanding of this brain map that my limb is immobile. And that is how I perceive it, and that is my body image understanding of this area of my body. As I perceive, my limb is immobile. And when they sever the connection, when they amputate this person's limb, they're then left with a new problem. Not only do they have a phantom limb, they have a phantom limb that then believes that it's frozen. And so their phantom limb doesn't even move out or reach or do anything like that. It stays in one place on their body, and these people describe it as being a heavy weight, and it's awkward, and they can't do anything about it, and they always feel like it's there. And again, driving the point home, it is what your brain believes that matters. And so they don't know the difference. That is reality to them. That is what the arm is doing. And so this doctor then thought, well, if all of this has to do with your perception, your brain believes and has developed for so many years with this arm in this way, and that your arm is you and you are your arm, that when you remove it, that it's going to be stuck like that. Could it then not be reasoned, if you actually believed or had the illusion that your arm was back and freely moving, that you could unlock this pattern in your now migrated brain map and turn it into something else? And so he developed an incredibly simple, fascinating little device called the mirror box. And what the mirror box does is just that. It creates the illusion that your limb is still there, often mirroring the other side of your body, something like that. And at first he got people to try this out, and they noticed immediately that if they perceived that their hand or arm was there and that they could move it, it felt as though their phantom limb was moving, because the brain, they trick the brain actually believes that that's its arm moving again, and so it's not locked in place. You can outsmart your brain. And so at first, all the success that people had with this was it was fairly limited, where if they weren't looking at the thing, as soon as they were gone, the limb would go back to its locked shape. But then he gave out this device to a few people so they could practice with it 10 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day. And until finally, people, many recorded cases, documented that they unfroze their arms and then diminished entirely. It removed the trauma of the experience and the need for your brain or whatever to hold on to this mental map that had migrated, till not only could the arm move, but eventually almost complete removal of the phantom limb, because your body believed that it was not there. Another interesting test to then turn this on its head was that he's had this other doctor in, and he wanted to show him how this works in reverse. if you believe that something that isn't there can be a part of you, can you make something that is not actually associated with you but is there feel like a part of you? So I'm going to try and explain this simply. It is simple. He'd basically get this mirror, this illusion again, where he'd start to build up he'd stroke your hand, and you would feel it. You would actually be doing that to begin with. But then he eventually creates the illusion where your hand isn't there. It's not your hand that he's stroking, but he makes it look like a fake hand is actually attached to your body. But because you've been so I don't want to say acclimatized, but become attuned to the fact that when you see your hand there and when he touches there, that you feel sensation, it eventually becomes the fact that when he creates the illusion of your hand being there, even if it's a fake hand, but it looks like your hand, he can touch the fake hand and it will feel like you're being touched. And so the reverse can be true. And I keep saying it because this is the point that people need to grasp, is that we live in our minds. It's our minds that are creating the reality. It's not the external world that is creating the reality. It's the internal world projecting out to create a reality. And so when you think of yourself as your arms and your body, the perfect example for this is that when you think about pain, you think about it in this way. If your back starts to hurt, you would say to yourself, oh, my back is killing me. You don't think that my brain is killing my back, but that is in fact what is true. Your pain that you feel is really the opinion of your brain. Trippy, right? How crazy is that? So further evidence that we've actually seen for years, but they couldn't, cross-associate these things all in the same way because they didn't have the greater picture, was something like Buddhist monks. And the comparison that I want to make is back to the Rage Against the Machine cover for one of their old albums, where you have this monk sitting on the front cover, and he's, in protest to the war, lit himself on fire, but is sitting there serenely, not feeling a thing. And that is because what is being discussed here is true, that he is able to prove the pain is an exterior force that your brain can choose to believe in or not. And he has such complete control of it that he is able to completely adapt to say, no, I don't feel that pain. It's an illusion to me, even if it would be good if he knew, because he is going to die. But he can control exactly what his response is to that. And so that pretty much wraps it up. I think this has been concise. I think I've made all my points, especially the point regarding your perception of your own body. Now, when you pick up a cheeseburger and you hold it in your hand, really, you're holding it in your brain, because you would still believe, if your hand weren't there, that your arm was extended. The proof of the phantom limbs. So there it is. How is that for some deep thoughts with Dave? I'm going to post again the link to this book. I think it should be mandatory reading for everybody. And it's not heavy. It's written in such a way that it's so easy to understand. Even like I'm a die-hard art student. I see a number, a formula, and I run screaming. And with just a little bit of attention, I've been able to understand this stuff pretty well, and I think that should be evident in the way in which I'm able to explain it, which I hope is clear. But if you enjoyed this, please like, subscribe. I'm going to be making more, especially to do with this book. It's been a very inspiring book. My contact will be down below as well. And like I like to say, until we meet again next time, world, thanks for tripping with Dave. I think this has been a pretty trippy experience. But ciao for now.